Hey everybody, I'm Todd and this is Sweet Tea Guitars. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel and welcome to a tools and tips video. Alright you guys, as most of you probably know by now, I am giving away a Noceti fretboard radiusing jig for March. That's the giveaway. All you need to do is subscribe to the channel, comment on that video. You'll be entered to win a state-of-the-art fretboard radiusing jig. So let me show you how this thing works. I've got my rigid router attached to the base right here. Any router, 3.5-inch motor on it, 65 millimeters for the metric world, will attach to this thing. It's got multiple holes drilled in it for basically any router base. That fits down in this carriage. Just like that. Then that rides back and forth across that arc right there, which is what creates the radius. This particular carriage is a 12-inch radius, which is what I'm using for the Les Paul build that I'm doing with Geo. I thought this would be a good opportunity to not only get my fretboard radiused, but to also show you guys how to go about using one of these things in case you win it from me, or in case you guys decide to head over to Dan's Etsy store, Noceti Custom Guitars on Etsy, and buy yourself one of these things. He also sells neck profile gauges and multiple radius levels for the fretboard radiusing jig. You can buy yourself an extra router base, whatever you need to be able to use that thing in your shop. You have to make yourself a base plate to use one of these things. So let's pan down here and let me show you what I've done. I've got a 23/32 base of Advantech 50-year OSB plywood as my base. I've got 2 sheets of 1/2-inch MDF. Now let me tell you why I use 2 sheets. I can pull this top layer of 1/2-inch off and have enough room under this carriage right here to be able to cut a radius in a fretboard that's already glued to a fender style neck, which is around 26 millimeters thick, including the fretboard at the center. I want to be able to radius a fretboard without it being glued to the neck. There's 2 ways you can handle that. The first is to use a longer router bit. But in my opinion, you'd be better off to leave this thing set up, use a 3/4 inch depth of cut, 1/2-inch diameter router bit for all this stuff. So I added a second layer of 1/2-inch MDF. Now I can mount a fretboard up to a 1/2-inch thick, mind you, to this top base plate, and my carriage will ride right over this thing, no problem. I wanted to show you guys how this thing operates. So let's crank up the Panasonic so you can get a little better view on how this thing works. So I've drawn myself a center line. I took this carriage right here, and as you can see, it's got a center line scratched into the top of that arc. That is also carried over to the side. That lets me know where the center of this jig is. Dan's also been working really hard to get his logo cut into the side of that. I love that. I think it's a really cool touch. Anyway, I sat this carriage down on here, took my square, lined it up with that mark on the top of the radius, and I marked myself a nick down here and a nick down here. Then I drew myself a line. That way I know that the center line is actually mated to the center line on the radius jig itself. Dan's jigs come with complete instructions on how to build this base, you guys. After careful consideration, I decided to add that top layer. Let me tell you another reason why I did it. In the future, I want to be able to cut myself a relief hole out of this end, out of this end, and make a cradle that will hold a neck that's already been carved. So I could actually cut the radius into a fretboard of a neck that's got a back angled headstock and a super thick heel. So that's coming in the future, but for now, this thing is made to cut a fretboard on its own or a fretboard that has been glued to a fender style flat neck up to 26 through 30 millimeters thick. We're going to do a fretboard. This is the fretboard I'm going to use on my Les Paul build. I was going to use Brazilian Kingwood, but I decided that it was too busy looking and I want to use a solid black fretboard. This right here was sent to me by ThermalWood Canada. It's obsidian ebony, and this is actually a maple fretboard that's been carbonized to be solid black. Not only that, this thing is hard as a rock, you guys. It is absolutely as hard as ebony. And I'm really anxious to use this. I'm really appreciative of ThermalWood Canada for sending me this thing just to try it out. I can already tell you guys I'm gonna like it. It's super hard, it's super black, and I'm really happy to have this as an alternative to actual ebony. So what we're gonna do, I'm going to take a 2-inch wide piece of masking tape. We'll get that roughly placed on the center line. I'm going to burnish this down. I put a straight edge on this, you guys, and I am dead flat. That is also important when you build this jig. I've got mine screwed to the table. After I screwed it down to make sure I didn't create a concave or a convex shape, because you will cut that shape into the fretboard, I did not want to take that chance, so I put a straight edge down on here. We are dead flat. Now what I have to do is put a piece of tape down the back of my fretboard. A little shorter than the piece of tape we just now used, but also shorter than the fretboard so we can actually see our center line. Let's burnish this down. All right, now we're going to take some medium thick super glue or some medium viscosity super glue. That should be plenty. I'm not going to use any activator. I want those couple of extra seconds. I've got myself a center line drawn to notate the center of this board. I've got a center line drawn both ways. I've also got a center line drawn both ways on the bed of my jig right here, so I can tell when I'm actually in the center both directions. So I'm going to place this on that center line. That looks good. I put my radius jig, or the carriage, right down over this. I'm going to unlock my router base. We'll run it up so I know the router bit's going to clear. And we want to drop this to where it touches the edge of the fretboard on the edge of the board itself. One thing I love about this rigid router is it has a fine adjustment built into the router right here on the front of it. So not only can you raise this up and down quickly by unlocking the latch, releasing the hold screw, and just pulling the base up and down, then you can fine tune it with the screw right here. I really love this thing, you guys. But all you want to do, and I'm going to give you an explanation of this before we crank up the router, is you start on one end, and because I know the router is spinning clockwise, I want to go this direction with the bit on this side of the board. I'll run it all the way down the length. I'll move the router over to the other side of the board and run this direction because I know it's spinning that way. What that means is my cut is going in towards the center instead of out. If I were to do it this way and run down this edge of the board, that means the bit is coming off of the fretboard as I travel down, which you take a chance of getting some chip out on that. So you want to be really mindful of the grain direction. If you have any run out on the grain, pay attention to that. Make sure the rotation of your router bit is going to facilitate a nice clean cut on your board. We're going to take a pass on this thing, and I'll start down here. We'll go that way. I'll move to that side of the board. We'll go that way. And then I'll continue to drop this down until we barely touch when we get to the center. That's going to maintain the full thickness of the fretboard that we need, and we're going to wind up with the perfect 12-inch radius that needs very little sanding to clean up. All right, as you can see, we've barely nicked the edge on this thing so far. We cut level all the way down, which is what I was looking for. I want that stripe to remain pretty much a consistent width all the way down. I'll drop it down a little more. We're going to keep just inching our way down until we get to where we're barely touching on the center line. It's dead on it, you guys. You couldn't ask for it to be much better. So I'm going to take this 12-inch radius block now. Actually, let's get our big one. I got 180 on this thing. "12-inch radius." That is how I radius a fretboard from here on out. Way more simple than using a radius sanding block. Now you still need to use one to clean up your radius after the fact to get rid of those superficial router marks, but it does not take long. So you guys go check out Noceti Custom Guitars here on YouTube. Make sure to visit Dan's store on Etsy. Again, Noceti Custom Guitars on Etsy. Dan sells the carriages individually. You can buy the router base individually, or you can buy the kit and then add these carriages as you need a different radius level. He also sells neck profiling templates over there. I'll put a link in the description to the store. You guys make sure to show Dan some love. He's a great guy, fantastic guitar builder. I hope you learned something from the video. I'll be doing these tools and tips videos from time to time, just like I told you guys in the chisel sharpening video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can stay up to date as I release all the videos I got planned for the future. Until then, and as always, peace and love.